Just one word. That's all Pam Bondi said. And it landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples across the entire chamber. John Kennedy asked a direct question. Had the Department of Justice investigated the individual who publicly described Jeffrey Epstein as the greatest blackmailer in history? Sitting at the witness table, backed by attorneys and surrounded by aides, the Attorney General looked up and answered, No explanation, no clarification, no indication of urgency, just that single word. And in that moment something shifted. It wasn't about legal phrasing or procedure anymore. It was about what that answer implied when followed to its conclusion. The hearing had started like any other. Measured tones, routine exchanges, cameras rolling, staff moving quietly in the background. Bondi carried herself with the calm confidence of someone experienced in these settings, composed and steady, clearly expecting another controlled session. But Kennedy approached differently. He didn't raise his voice or rush in. He built his line of questioning step by step, slowly, deliberately, until the weight of it became impossible to ignore. It started with a name, Howard Lutnick, a high-level figure with proximity to Epstein. Unlike others, Lutnick hadn't relied on cautious legal language when speaking publicly. He described Epstein in stark terms, calling him the greatest blackmailer in history, suggesting a system built not just on exploitation, but on leverage, on collecting damaging information and using it to influence powerful people. And when asked whether that claim had triggered any investigation, the answer was just one word. No. Now pause and really think about what that suggests. If Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just involved in trafficking and abuse, but was instead operating within a system built on blackmail, then the crimes we know about may only be part of a much larger picture. In that scenario, the real currency isn't just exploitation, it's leverage. The power comes from holding secrets, from knowing that influential figures could be controlled because damaging information already exists somewhere, documented and ready. And the people tied to that kind of system aren't ordinary. They're decision-makers, individuals whose choices can shape policy, law, and public outcomes. That's what makes silence so significant in a situation like this. When John Kennedy entered that hearing, his line of questioning reflected that understanding. He wasn't guessing, he was building toward a point. He asked whether Pam Bondi had reviewed the full transcript of an interview involving a senior figure who described Epstein in those exact terms. She hadn't, only a clip. The Attorney General of the United States had not examined the full record of a public statement describing Epstein as a systemic blackmailer. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The facts were doing the work. Then came the follow-ups. Had that individual been interviewed by the Department of Justice? No. Were there plans to do so? The answer wasn't a refusal. It was something more subtle. The suggestion was that a conversation could happen if the individual chose to speak, or if the FBI decided to initiate it. And that distinction matters. That's not the language of active investigation. It's the language of waiting. And in cases like this, waiting is not neutral. It's a decision. Because while institutions pause, real people don't have that luxury. For years, victims, many of them young at the time, have been asking for answers, trying to understand the full scope of what happened to them. So when new claims surface, especially ones pointing toward a broader system of control, the response becomes just as important as the claim itself. Every delayed interview, every lead that isn't pursued right away, every moment where maybe later replaces urgency, those choices don't land the same for everyone. For outsiders, it can feel procedural. For those directly affected, it feels like a pattern. Some issues move fast, pushed forward with energy and focus, while others seem to slow down, handled more cautiously, sometimes because of what the answers might reveal rather than how serious the issue is. That idea has been around for a while, but in this hearing it became harder to ignore. Then John Kennedy did something that shifted the entire tone. He introduced a hypothetical. He asked Pam Bondi to picture a common situation: federal investigators requesting phone records from a telecom company. That's routine. Companies receive subpoenas, review them through legal teams, and decide how to respond. But then he added a variable that changed everything. What if the target wasn't an ordinary citizen? What if it was a sitting U.S. senator? And then he pushed it further. What if it wasn't just one but several? 8 senators. The room didn't erupt. Didn't need to. It shifted in a quieter, more unsettling way. The kind of shift that happens when a question suddenly feels too real. Kennedy understood the system well. Telecom companies aren't powerless when faced with subpoenas. Their legal teams evaluate the request, consider challenging it, and weigh potential liability, especially if the people involved might take legal action. There are processes in place, protections, and avenues for review. Bondi responded by outlining those principles, acknowledging that companies can push back, that accountability matters, and that judicial oversight exists. John Kennedy then narrowed the focus even further. If telecom companies complied with government requests for the phone records of 8 sitting U.S. senators without challenging those subpoenas, then the legal justification behind those requests must have been extremely strong, because if it wasn't, those companies would be exposing themselves to serious legal risk and public backlash. His point was blunt. If you didn't challenge it, you'd better have had a very solid reason. Then came the follow-up. Had Pam Bondi seen the actual subpoena requests? No. Had the department confirmed obtaining them? No clear answer. Was there an active inquiry? No confirmation. When could the committee expect clarity? Nothing definitive. 3 direct questions and each one led to the same place, no resolution. Now step back and look at what this hearing actually revealed, not just in words but in structure. A senior figure with direct proximity to Jeffrey Epstein publicly described him as the greatest blackmailer in history. That claim is known at the highest levels, yet there's no clear evidence of a full investigation or even a direct follow-up with the source. At the same time, a scenario raised in the hearing suggests federal access to communications involving multiple current members of Congress, with telecom providers appearing to comply. And still, the Department of Justice has neither confirmed nor denied key elements of that situation. Individually, each of these points is significant. Together, they point to something broader, a system that may hold more information than it openly acknowledges. Not necessarily through coordination or intent, but through how its own processes can be applied unevenly. The same mechanisms designed to enable accountability can, in certain contexts, be used selectively. And systems rarely announce when that shift happens, they reveal it through patterns over time. Kennedy wasn't just pressing a single allegation. He was laying out a framework, step by step, letting the logic speak for itself. If you follow that chain carefully, without adding speculation, you're left with unanswered questions that haven't been fully addressed. Consider the blackmail claim in full. If Epstein operated a network built on collecting compromising information, then whatever was gathered didn't simply vanish. Either it was destroyed, raising questions about when, how, and under whose authority, or it still exists somewhere stored beyond public reach. Both possibilities carry serious implications. And yet, despite a publicly available interview from someone with direct proximity to Epstein, there's been no visible urgency. No confirmed interview, no detailed review, no clear next step. That's not just a minor procedural gap. It's a question that remains open. The question about phone records adds even more weight to everything that was said, because gaining access to the communications of 8 sitting U.S. senators wouldn't happen casually. It would require multiple layers of approval, probable cause, judicial oversight, and sign-off across the chain of command, meaning decisions like that carry serious legal, political, and constitutional consequences, and if something like that occurred, people at the highest levels would have known, while classifying the information doesn't remove responsibility for choosing to pursue it in the first place, which is exactly why John Kennedy asked those pointed questions about whether a special counsel would inform the Attorney General or whether FBI leadership would be briefed, because those aren't rhetorical. They're tests of whether oversight systems are actually functioning as intended, and that's what makes the outcome of the hearing feel unsettled, since on the surface the answers were careful, technically correct, and procedurally sound, yet underneath there remained a gap between what the system claims to do and how it appears to act when powerful individuals are involved, a gap that shows up through patterns like delayed follow-ups, unanswered questions, and responses that satisfy legal standards while leaving the central issue untouched, something observers have long pointed out in connection to Jeffrey Epstein's network, and moments like this don't resolve those concerns, but instead reinforce them, because when complicated answers replace simple ones it suggests some questions are treated with far more caution than others, which isn't just a legal outcome but a human one about priorities and attention, and it all circles back to that single word, no. No confirmed interview, no full transcript review, no visible urgency around an allegation that, if true, reaches the highest levels of power, leaving that word sitting in the record, unanswered, waiting for whatever comes next.